Okay, so once the delay of 20 seconds is over, then it should start. I keep the delay just so that if I want to stream like a tournament, that delay would be required, then I don't have to do the delay for the tournament beforehand. I just keep the delay at 20 seconds. Anyway, so hello, everyone. So let's see if it started. Okay, so it started. Okay. So we'll start out with Blitz on Lichess, and then maybe puzzles. And we'll close out of this com window. Okay. Yeah, so I'll start with Blitz and then 3 plus 2, and then we'll see what I do. Previously, I had streamed on Lichess, but I had forgotten to make it public. But as things turned out, I felt like maybe I'd rather keep maybe the way I was on that stream. I didn't really feel that proud to share, so I'll turn the sound on. I'll go c3 and d3 if knight f6. Even if d4, bishop d4 would be bad there, so. Anyway, I get a bishop for a pawn here, so that is what that is. Well, it is what it is. Oh. And I could go e5 too. I mean, then d5. I can just castle. Maybe d6. I'll go e5 now. And d5, then ef6, dc4, maybe like rook e1, bishop e6, fg7, rook g8. Okay. I could go queen b3, and maybe queen e7. Maybe just go rook e1. And maybe like bishop f4. And if short castle, maybe like queen c1. If d5, maybe ed6. If knight g6, I can probably take on h6 with the bishop. If knight f5, maybe I could maybe go g4, then knight h4, or maybe just go knight bd2. If knight f5, or I could also go like h3, but maybe knight bd2 there. If knight g6, I guess maybe bishop g3. I mean bishop h6, probably not gonna be what I do. I could go knight e4 also. This is reasonable enough. Maybe h5. Because I could have also moved the bishop back. If b5, maybe bishop d5. Knight f4, queen f4. Oh, I didn't see those hanging. But well, I guess if I do that, they could go king g8. And then knight f7, rook f7, bishop g5, hg5, knight g5. I guess we probably win for white. And also, like, if king g8, knight f7, rook f7, bishop h6 maybe. And maybe knight f5. And maybe I could go bishop f7, king f7. I mean, maybe bishop g5, and there's queen c4 stuff. There'll also be queen f4. After king f7 there. If queen e8, then maybe knight g5. I think gh6, I go queen h6. If knight e5, maybe bishop g5, and then take on f7, and then take on h4. Probably I'd do this. Like queen c4 and knight g5 stuff. Oh, there's knight g to e5, or knight c5, although then knight h7. After the king goes to e5, I can go bishop g7. Knight f6 here. Knight c7, knight h7, king e8, knight g5. And just bishop g7 there also after king e8. If d5, ed6, queen f6 would be not what I would want. I could go knight g5, and if they take on e5, maybe knight h7 and f4, bishop g5 stuff. Should lose for black. And bishop g7 after knight f8. Knight c7, queen g7. Okay, new game. That one they blundered the bishop for a pawn. And they've played this before in the database. So if they take on b7, then knight c6. Here I go for bishop c5 and quickly develop. And the pawn e3 blocks the bishop on c1. So that gives some compensation for the pawn. And I have more activity, better developed. Right now there's the x-ray on the d file. Knight d4, knight c6, knight f3 is a possible repetition. Although I could maybe try maybe I could play something else. Or I could just draw the game. This. Well, I mean, draw the game if they would be willing to. I mean, take this. And maybe, I mean, I could go bishop g4 also. Bishop c6. Maybe knight b5. I mean, bishop g4, I'm not sure how they save the pawn. I mean, rook e1, rook d4. Like bishop g4, rook d4, queen. I know they can go queen e2 there, so that doesn't work. So I guess I'll just do this. I mean, I could take d4 either way. Bishop d4, bishop f3. Then if bishop f3, queen f3. If after bishop d4, bishop f3, like queen c7, then maybe queen e2. Bishop f3, queen f3, if rook e8, queen d3. Then maybe queen b6. And if rook d4, queen c2, rook f4, maybe, and rook d4, bishop d3, like queen d6. If rook d4, queen c1, and knight g4, bishop g4, rook g4, rook e7, rook g2, king f1, and the e1 square is free. Rook d4, queen c1, rook h4, b5, bishop f2, king f2, queen c5, king f1, or king g3, or I don't know. No, just take this. Okay, some nice tactics there. Yeah, I mean, I saw like I could, like, it seemed like skewing the queen, and yeah, I mean, I guess maybe I didn't fully, like, completely check, but yeah, king f1, queen g2 is checkmate, so, and also, like, if king f1, which I didn't necessarily, like, fully consider, but, I mean, I guess there's queen h2. I was thinking during the game that maybe, like, there would be this, but now I realize there's actually this move, and, I mean, I guess I could go king h3, but I guess maybe just take this. Yeah, knight a4. I mean, it allowed me to double the pawns at the very least with bishop f3. I guess queen c7 was a mistake. I guess, so how's this? I guess there would be like knight g4, king g3, and like queen g5, I guess, h4. What would it be? And queen d6. Like if this, then like rook. Oh yeah, he's taking f3 in addition to rook d4. Okay, yeah. So I guess that was the first bad move from white. Yeah, bishop g4 I was discussing, but I think this loses for black because of this move. And the queen's unprotected. And if queen e2, then bishop e2. And this bishop's also defended, so rook d2 could be responded to by like rook ab1, or and this might allow bishop d4 though, but maybe bishop c1, rook c2 though. Still maybe not that easy for white, but there should be some way. Maybe not knight a4, that would hang this bishop on e2. Maybe like this or something. And then like if rook e2, then bishop d4, and if bishop b2, then rook b2. And if b5, then bishop b5. In addition to, yeah, well, I guess not bishop, well, in addition to bishop d4, because of ba4, bishop f6, or bishop f3, hitting this rook. And like if rook d4, then like knight c5, or rook e2, and use bishop f6, or knight c3. So bishop g4 there wouldn't work for me. So rook d4 is correct. A lot better than bishop d4. What should white have done here? Knight a2, it says. Yeah, so I should have taken on f2, it said. But this is a natural move, like x-raying h2, getting out of the attack, and it's still winning for black, according to the engine. Like, based on what it says, like, still minus 2.5, winning for black. And this sequence worked out. The tactics worked out there for black for me. So, another game. I'm gonna try 1d4 and play like solidly. You have the bishop to h2 square, and also covering the g4 square and giving the h2 square not only for the bishop but also for kingside castled king. This looks like a Caro-Kann now. Bishop f5, bishop f5, gf5, knight b2. I mean, looks like similar to Caro-Kann. If b5 should be like, it's a bit much. Like, seems maybe kind of early. And I could go a4, I could go knight b3. Maybe knight d7. Maybe I can go queen e2. maybe rook e1 was better because now after rook e8, then the rook x-rays the queen and there's e5 coming. So maybe I shouldn't have played it like this. Queen probably should have gone to d2. It's probably not a great move because it gives me the d6 square and the bishop's already. The bishop can already go there, and after bishop d6, then I'm also covering maybe against b4, like if a4. So maybe go a4 here first. And this bishop d6 does leave the bishop unprotected, so maybe I go a4 first. And after that, then I mean, I could go c before knight. I guess if they don't go knight before, then b5 is coming, but they could maybe go e5 in between, but then d5. And if knight b4, bishop d6, knight d3, bishop f8, knight f4, queen d2, bishop h6, bishop h6. I mean, they could go like knight h3 and maybe king h2 there, and queen f8 or bishop f8, then king h3, but maybe just gh3 there. Probably just go bishop d6 first. And then maybe they go bc3 here. Bishop f8, cb2. I can go queen b2. Maybe bishop f8. Queen f8. This is reasonable enough. Knight b4. Maybe just bishop f1. Bishop b7, knight a5. Rook b8. Queen a3. Or maybe rook c7. You can also go bishop b5 here. And then knight b6, knight e5. I can go knight e5 here too. And maybe knight e5, d5. Rook c7. Maybe that's what I should do. Rook b8. Rook c1. Maybe bishop b5. And that gives me like knight e5 without the knight being able to capture. Yeah. I mean, I could pre-move queen h6. Or I can just not. Okay. Yeah, time scramble there. I guess they were looking for. Okay, I guess they were looking for a rematch, maybe. But having some connection problems, maybe. Here. Yes. No, here they had knight c4, which would make this undefended, and this would also be hanging. And if bishop e8, there. If like knight c4, bishop e8, then queen c7 and f7 is sufficiently defended for black, so yeah, they had a chance here. Yeah, this would have removed the defender with the knight on b4. Yeah, so how would I do in this sequence? Yeah, actually, how would I do after, like, so this whole, how would I do here? So, he working one's low, okay, knight b2 is fine. Okay, so knight b3 was okay. And here, yeah, rook e1 a little bit better than queen e2. Or a bit better than queen e2. Here they could have gone e5 here. And then rook e8. So, I mean, I was saying rook e8, but then I should put the knight on e5. So a4 is okay here, but it's actually not the best move. Rook if e1 or knight e5. I guess this is playable for them if queen b6. cb4 also okay, but bishop d6 is better. Like what happens, like, I guess I was thinking like this move. I was thinking like this stuff. Yeah. Yeah, black's okay, so. This is reasonable enough for fc1. So anyway, maybe new game. See if I get paired and watch the Lichess TV ourselves. Or think about this puzzle. In this puzzle, I mean dc8, queen d5, queen g4 is possible, but here black is already up a piece. If queen c4, then bishop d7, bishop g5, I guess queen d7. It's not that easy. What would it be? Rook d1, bishop d7, queen h5, bishop d7, bishop g5, queen d7, queen f7, rook f7. Here you go for normal stuff here. And play this. Which I've played publicly and in the database a number of times before. They should short castle their on move 6 instead of knight c3. Now it gets double their make their c pawns doubled and isolated, and their a pawn is also isolated. You can just castle, which is a goal for black in this line, to be able to castle. And I go king h8 or queen e8, or is there knight g4 here and then knight f5, bishop f5, e f5, queen h4. Knight g4, there's knight f3. If bishop g4, maybe bishop e2. And I can go queen e8. And maybe like knight h5 later, or maybe some bishop g4. and then maybe put the queen on h5. I guess maybe they're hoping that, I don't know, they're just putting the rook on a half-open file. And that also leaves the a2 pawn undefended. And if bishop g4, maybe queen d3, queen h5, maybe after bishop g4, queen d2, but that blocks the c1 bishop. I guess this is reasonable enough, maybe, at least. If bishop b2, maybe queen h5. If knight f3, maybe queen h5, but then bishop b2. Then yeah, then maybe like, okay, f3, and I could go queen h5, fg4, queen h4. I mean, bishop b2, I mean, queen h5 looks, I mean, maybe g3, but bishop b6. Should be something at least. Fg4, queen h4. And I could go bishop h3 here, or I could go bishop. I guess bishop b6, and that way not bishop c4 and rook b7. In which point they would also have rook c7 against knight a5. And the a2 pawn is hit, but they want bishop c4. Knight a5 is also a move. Maybe a4, but okay, maybe I go b6, that way I can play bishop a2 without rook a1 skewer. I mean, maybe they go a3 or a4, and then I could go maybe king h8, or maybe knight d7. And I can take on a2. You can also take on f5, ef5. Then for a8, maybe queen g2. If g6, maybe knight h6, king g7. I think take this one. Rook a1, maybe bishop e6. b2, bishop e6, rook b5, maybe king h8, or no, bishop e6, maybe to get out of the way of c4 stuff, which would trap the bishop. And queen h3 is possible. Queen f7 being the queen f7, queen 8 being the other safe moves for the queen, because queen g6 and e7. And queen h3, maybe queen f2. So I probably just go to f7, which also gives me more influence over c4. And king h8 maybe, which does make g6 something more to consider, because knight h6 wouldn't be a fork of the king and queen. You could also go h5, g5, then maybe like knight goes somewhere, and maybe g6 coming. And there's d5 stuff also, or I could put a piece on c4. Maybe knight g8 was better, covering h6. And also then maybe there'd be some knight e7 idea. Here there is maybe more of a... They want queen g6, rook g1. But, well... Okay. Another one there. Time scramble. I should have been winning the whole way in the time scramble at least better, or not, apparently. There's rook f7. There's a blunder, apparently. So they had something here. Not sure what it was, but I guess they had something. I guess this was correct for them. So rook g5, and then if queen d, I guess if queen d7, there's maybe something like this. And like take, and then rook h5. Like if this, then rook h5 checkmate. And so it's saying to rook g5 to go queen c8. And what does it say? Like bishop g7 and and then this. And you have king f8. Maybe there's still some perpetual like this. Maybe black can't escape here. Yeah, that's exactly what it's saying. So basically like by transposition. So apparently they had advantage here too. Bishop f5 was wrong. And queen g6 worked. But this was wrong for me. Apparently they actually have something here, even though they're down by 3 pawns. I guess like rook g5 and f4. I guess rook f7, rook g. Oh, I guess it says f4 right away, and then rook g5. Interesting stuff. So queen h5 was a blunder. If they take, bishop b2, then I guess white's better with, especially the light scored bishop. And he's king h8, then maybe g5. You know, king h8, g5, and there'd be knight e4. So maybe like maybe g3, queen h3, and bishop f1. There would be queen g4, maybe g5 here. So that way, like if the knight, let's see, like I mean even takes like bishop g4, and the queen is trapped, and if knight c3, then I could take, and take. So I guess that queen h5 was a bad move. Bishop g4 was sort of okay. What are the best moves here? Use king h8. Like d6, yeah, those. I mean, this ain't. So knight h4, yeah, castle. Here, it says a6. And then like maybe back and knight f3. I was mentioning knight f3 idea. And a number of moves are okay, queen e8 being the best according to the engine at that depth. Anyway, maybe a new game. And as for this puzzle, maybe it's b4, like so that bishop b4, queen c4, and both bishops are hit. And if queen f6, there would be maybe some bishop g5. But if b4, bishop b6, I'm still not sure. The only puzzles on Lichess aren't supposed to be that hard for someone who's like titled. But anyway, this one's giving me some trouble, evidently. Oh no, yeah, dc8, queen d5, and then I don't know, maybe there's something like because Lichess, especially the daily puzzle, should be able to win. Lichess puzzles are in general, I think. At least in general. So I'm actually not sure about this one. The puzzle of the day. Like bishop g5, queen d7. And if I consider try to consider like every move, like queen a5, knight a5, queen, no, I don't know. Okay, maybe I'll go b4. Bishop b2. I guess I'm gonna go knight f3. And castle. This is maybe something against d4. Then maybe c4. So I have some control over central squares like d5 and e4. Knight c3 will block the bishop. So now their b7 pawn is unprotected, and if my knight on f3 moves, then it's hit by the bishop on g2. Yeah, I should have seen that, but I should have maybe gone rook e1 there, but anyway. You can go a6. If ab7, bishop f3, I guess. I mean, is that a problem? Like b8, bishop a8, rook a7? Maybe not to what I would want. Like maybe not to my liking, but you know, at least I have the advanced pawn a6 here. So you're gonna go e3 and d4. And queen f5, maybe queen b3. Then knight d7, and maybe d4. This, I mean, d4, I guess there's e4. You can just go knight e4. Like 94, d4, 97, and then e5 would be hanging because of the pin on the d file. So like bishop e5, for example. And then, yeah, bishop e5, knight e5, queen e6. You can still take on e4. What else might they do here? Maybe like rook e8. I mean, maybe I take on f6. There, this. I mean, they want to have like the bishop influencing h4, but even here, like I could go like h3, and if h4, g4, and d5 would leave the e5 pawn hanging. This move, I mean, I could maybe go, I mean, g4, maybe hg4, 97, maybe knight d. I could go knight d2, I guess this, and then d5 maybe, and you take knight e4, knight d6, queen f3, knight e4, d4. That looks reasonable enough. There's also an e4 idea there that maybe they missed, that I also missed. I got instead of rook e8. So queen f3. I mean, maybe knight e4 is better though. I don't really know why not this per se. I mean, my pawn on g3 is covering its knight h4 fork. Oh. Yeah, I mentioned that and I missed it, but I can go rook a2. Yeah. Like bishop b2, rook a2, so that way if bishop c3, my knight on d2 is protected. Okay. Maybe put this rook on d1. I mean, my knight would like to be on f4, that's a ways away, but maybe I go queen e2 and maybe go f4. Maybe try to get the knight to f3. Queen d3 maybe. And I could go knight b3. I guess this is reasonable enough, like knight d4, knight c6 maybe, or at least knight d4, and then that helps cover the f5 square. I didn't see queen e7. I mean, I wanted to push the pawn in here. Yeah, I mean, this is probably not really much worse than queen d2 or queen c2, queen d3 or queen c2. Hmm. Rook e5. Now I lose this. Allowing rook e5 there. I guess it was already lost for me. I feel like the endgame should be holdable, but if it takes, I guess there's 94. I saw that like if the bishop weren't defending this, then like there would be fe5, and I would have queen f7 of queen e5. But the bishop is defending this, but I have 94 here. And maybe like if bishop b2, maybe f5, or rook d2 maybe. Yeah, tough game. But yeah, I shouldn't have been allowing e4 like this. Wait, so what would happen if they got e4 here? I guess I take, and if it takes, then like okay, 2. Like I was saying during the game when they did go e4. So I guess e4 here would be a lot better for white. What about knight e4? So I guess this does actually work out for black. Because if I take this, then you have to queen d5 and this is hanging. And there's this pin also. If this, like if not of d4, but of cd5. So knight g5 would be best here, but yeah, so I should go e4, and that would be a lot better. Because of this, like giving me, it's definitely a lot of like maybe endgame potential at least, and also I would have like more space. Like after this knight moves, which I mean, I guess, and then suggesting like knight h6 stuff, which doesn't look great, and I could maybe try to move this knight to like f3 or b3, and maybe after supporting this pawn enough, because it's x-rayed by the rook, then maybe go d4. And if the knight gets d4, then maybe knight c6 sometime, although there's also this x-ray. So should I have allowed this bishop h3? No, I should have played power. I mean, I was thinking rook e1 maybe I should have done. But I guess it's saying that I could do something more concrete. Or something more forcing with d4 or c5. d5 here. And then the knight can go to d4. Or I guess if bishop h3, it's saying knight e1. It says like knight fd5. And I would think cd5, I guess there's this hanging. It's like ef3, it says d6, which is the queen. And the material ends up equal, sort of, but the b7 pawn is hanging, so actually, yeah, materials, yeah, after that, then I guess the material is equal. But with this being an isolated pawn, this being backward, some light squares, being maybe not so much d5, maybe sort of d5 at least, some light squares being at least somewhat important, then white has advantage here and black should be careful. So rook can maybe go to the c file, which is half open for white. The queen could go to c2. And maybe like try to bring the knight to c6, like maybe like this. Or maybe this. Like if bishop d4, then queen d4 would hit the pawn on a7. Anyway, maybe, should I do 3-0? I mean, I could maybe. And then maybe puzzle. This is faster. Saw this opening earlier against BRM 1965. But not with E3. BRM accepted the gambit. Well, technically I didn't gambit in this game because I could, because EG5 is also a possible addition to CD4. Maybe I should have gone H6. Like if queen b3 h6, and here I can still go h6. I have g5 if I want it, at least for the moment. Maybe I should do it because they could go queen d2, otherwise maybe deter it at least. Maybe they go bishop d3. Maybe I go rook fe8 or knight d7 maybe. I mean, there's knight g4, but that could maybe... I know, is that really loose? Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe rook a8, bishop c8 if... Okay. Now there's knight e5. I guess I can go king g7, rook h8. Or knight f6, but... This seems like I'm holding on at least. Let's put the rook on the open e file, but... the rook on h8 wants to be staying guarding h7. And you like queen f6. Knight e5. Maybe knight g5. Knight e5. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe there'll be bishop d7. Or maybe bishop. Well, anyway. Taking maybe rook e8. Maybe try for bishop f5 for queen f3. Maybe b6. Knight c8 d3. Maybe bishop f5 then. If knight b3, then maybe queen c7. Just blundered. The queen. He didn't. They didn't go knight e6. Knight f5, king g6, queen a4, maybe queen d3, maybe rook b1. maybe rook e3, knight g4, knight f2, queen e1, queen a4. Yeah, that would work. Yeah, if g4, knight g4, king h3, queen h4. Okay, so I talked about doing puzzles, and maybe I'll do that now. At least a little bit. Okay, so I was talking about the daily puzzle earlier, and I still didn't do it, but anyway. Okay, so I'm in check, so options include king c2, rook d2, rook f4, but then queen f4, and king b1. And when threatening checkmate after king b1, king c2, rook d2 via queen a7, king c8, and then queen b7 or queen a8. So if king b1, then if knight c7, the black's defending against the checkmate threat, and here black's up a piece and two pawns. However, that consists of like the knight on g8 and the pawns on g7 and h7, none of which are really doing all that much here, and the rook on h8 is also trapped. So after king b1, if knight c7, then maybe rook c7, then they would have to go king c7, then maybe queen a7, king d6, if knight b5, cb5, queen a7, king d6, or queen c5, king d7, or rook c1, king d7, or king b7 there, then there wouldn't be a safe check. And I like king b1 because I can get the c file for the rook. So maybe king b1, knight c7. If rook c1, then maybe queen e5, which gives extra defense to the knight on c7. If d4, then queen d6 maybe. King b1, knight c7, queen a5, knight e7, queen b6, king c8. Yeah, I don't really have a great check there. King b1, knight c7, if queen c5, then knight e7, rook e7, because the queen on c5 helps cover e7. And if after queen c5, rook c8, then maybe queen b6, king a8, queen c6, and then knight b5 is coming. And so then why, if I'm going to go queen c5, then why king b1 as opposed to king c2 or rook d2? Well, if rook d2, then there could be queen g1 and then queen b6. And if king c2, then there's knight d4, but then king b1. If knight c7, queen c5, there's queen g2, but then rook d2. Although then knight d4 if the knight hasn't gone c7 yet. If king c2, queen g2, then king b1. That seems to be... Well, also we should consider, like, maybe not knight c7 after something like king b1. What else would black do there? Because queen a7 is a serious threat. And if king c8, queen a8, checkmate. King b1, so knight c7, queen c5. There's queen g3 or queen e5 ideas to help guard the knight on c7, then to go king c8 after queen b6. And after king c8 there, so where does it matter if the king is? Like, if the king's on b1, then I could go knight b5 there. Because knight b5, queen b7, and if cb5, then rook c1, but then knight e7. King b1, knight c7. If knight b5, queen c5. Does that work? Or knight b5, cb5. Maybe rook c1, then maybe even queen c1 or something, and then knight f6 after king c1. So, trying to analyze the difference between king b1 and king c2. I'm trying to figure out which one I should do, basically. There are probably multiple differences between the two moves. Like king b1, I mean, they should go knight c7, and queen c5, queen e5, or queen g3. And if knight b5, cb5, queen b6, king c8, rook c1, rook d7, rook f8, rook d8. After rook d7 there, maybe queen a6, king d8, rook f8, king e7. I would think I would want the king on b1 to be able to go rook c1. Knight c7, queen c5, queen e5. I mean, there's queen c6 maybe also, but then queen d6. If queen b6, king c8, if d4, there's queen d6. If knight b5, cb5. And if the queen's on b6, then there's also knight e7 blocking the rook on f7 from hitting c7. And if knight b5 before queen b6, then cb5, if rook c1 first, but then there's queen d6. And what is there besides queen c5 after knight c7? Like if knight b5, there's cb5. Queen a5, knight e7, knight e4, d4. There's rook c7, king c7, queen a7, king d6, knight e4, d4, d4, king e6, knight b5, cb5 after king d6, then queen b6, king e7. King b1, knight c7, queen c5, queen e5. We talked about this. Rook c1, queen d6, queen b6, king c8, knight b5. So after queen e5, rook c1, if knight f6, knight b5, knight e7, rook e7, if knight h6, maybe rook e7, queen f4, wait no, rook e7, queen d6, queen b6, king c8, knight b5, queen e7, knight a7, king d7, queen c6 would be checkmate. After knight b5, there's cb5, rook c to c7, for example. And knight b5, queen b7, checkmate. And I think it's king b1, knight c7, queen c5, queen e5, rook c1. I mean, so for knight f6, after rook c1, knight b5, rook e8, knight b5, if rook c8, still knight b5, if rook d6, I think still knight b5, if king c8 there, probably still be knight b5. Yeah, I mean, I think I like that. And I think queen c5 here. The other moves I was suggesting didn't seem to work out. Yes. But also, if queen e5, I was thinking rook c1 here. Yes. And I was saying a line like this, like if saying there's this checkmate. But yeah, rook c1 will be the key move of queen e5. So maybe the puzzle should have asked for that, but it didn't. So maybe one more puzzle. I mean, I guess I can say I still like the puzzle, even though it didn't go maybe as far as maybe it would have been better training or a better test. But I mean, I guess queen e5 isn't the engine move. I guess queen g3 is. At which point white has multiple winning moves. But rook c1 wouldn't actually be it because of this. So I didn't actually figure this one out, but I guess the idea is to bring the other rook to the 7th rank. So I didn't talk about that. That wasn't part of my solution, but it should have been. Because I should have considered both queen e5 and queen g3, rather than lumping them together as I did. Because there's for example, the difference that if rook c1, there's queen d3. I guess if rook g1, then even if queen d3, probably king a1. Yeah, and still like this threat. Well, yeah, because the rook is covering f1. Not to mention that knight b1 will be a defense against black hitting the back rank. I guess rook c1. What is it? No, it's not queen d3. It's knight h6. Oh, because rook e7 doesn't hit the queen on e5. So that's another difference. So I guess that's the key difference is that rook e7 doesn't hit a queen on e5, and so black gains a tempo to do something, which is to attack the rook again, either on f5 or g8. So that was a good puzzle. Okay, so this comes from a game that was played with starting time of 15 seconds, but 4 seconds added per move. So not ultra bullet. Definitely far from ultra bullet. Okay, so if a3, king b3, the king b3 is not forced because the king's already in the square, knight f4 would be, for example, also possible. But if king b3, then if d4, knight f4, well, if I start with d4, then if king b4, then d3, then white could go knight f4, d2 would be maybe possible, though king e4 would also be possible there. But if king e4, then maybe king c3, e3, then knight d3, and if a2, then knight c5, king f3, knight b3 coverage against the a pawn. That line is d4, king b4, d3, knight f4, king e4, king d4 would help stop king c3, which is the next move in the line that I was talking about just now, in the a3, knight d3, a2, knight c5, king f3, knight b3. This is the line I was just discussing. But even then, maybe king g3 and maybe black's still winning. D4 seems like a nice move to push the passed pawn with tempo. We're trying to win with the split passed pawns. D and A. Because usually, at least usually, I think in Lichess puzzles, the goal is to win. If d4, king d3, a3, and king c2, d3, that should be what black wants. d4, king b2, d3, king c3, a3, knight f4, d2, knight d3, king e4, knight f2, king e3, knight d1, king e2, king c2, a2, and knight c3, king e1, king b2, d1, queen, knight d1, king d1, king e2, king e2, and black's much closer to the pawns on the king side, which is a theme. Like if I get the knight as black for the past d&a pawns, but the king may be much closer to the remaining kingside pawns. To the kingside pawns, those would be the same ones that are here currently. If d4, king c4, if a3, then there is knight f4. No, there isn't. No, knight f4 wouldn't work there. But king b3, d3, knight f4, king d4. It looks winning for black. Like if d4, king d2, a3, knight f4, a2, knight d3, not king e4, king e6 would allow knight b5, knight c5, and knight b3, but king d6, for example, and then the a pawn would promote. If I ask like what's wrong with something like king e4, then I guess knight f6 would be an answer, maybe. And then like king e5 to try to hold on to the d5 pawn, then maybe knight d7. In a3 I was talking about king b3, d4, maybe knight f4, king e4, knight, and then king a3, d3, king b3, and maybe king e3, knight d5. And I think I would like d4 here. If king c2, then maybe a3, but then knight f4. If d4, king c2, like if d3, then king d3, and the king is still in the square with the a pawn. King c2 after d4, then if king e4, knight f4, but if, yeah, so that's, I guess, the tricky one is king c2. So d4, king c2, if, I was saying if a3, then knight f4, if d3, then king d3, if king e4, knight f4, if king d5, knight f4, king c4, and probably king b, maybe knight d3 there, and then a3, knight c1. Though even then, like d3, then maybe king d2. So d4, I mean, what happens, like, I mean, if I start with a3, king b3, d4, knight f4, king e4, king a3, d3, king b2, king e3, king c1, and the knight on f4 is guarding e2. I mean, I think we should start with d4, but what happens after king c2? Like, what do I do there? King e4, knight f4, king f3 would be one logical way of continuing, maybe. And if knight e6, then if king e3, then knight f4, knight c5. But if after king f3, like d4, king c2, king e4, knight f4, king f3, knight e6, king g3, knight d4, f4, knight e2, king g4. It still looks good for black, and I think I should start with d4. And so it goes king b4. So if d3, so if king c3, a3, it would also be king e4 there, but if a3, knight f4, king e4, knight d3, a2, knight c5, king f3, knight b3, king g3. I think I discussed that line. Like, what's wrong with king e4 here, for example, instead of d3? King a4, d3, knight f4, d2, knight e2, king d3, knight f4, king e3, knight d5, king d4. Like, why not king e4 here? It looks also maybe like a good move, like knight f4, d3, king c3, a3, knight d3, a2, knight c5, king f3, knight b3. I guess there's also king b2 there. Knight c5, king f3, king b2, king g3, h5. Maybe the knight can hold off those knight. Maybe the knight can hold off like black's kingside attempts. Maybe the king can come back in time after taking on a2. If d3, knight f4, king d4. If king c3, there after d3, then if a3. I mean, that's like the most obvious way of continuing. Knight f4. Like, these Lichess puzzles get through ring, like people failing them, like that's how the rings of these puzzles go up. So theoretically, a high root puzzle, which should be, given my reading, should not really be very obvious. But anyway, if d3, king c3, e3, knight f4, e2, knight d3, king e4, knight c5, yeah, I mean, getting the same position. So, I mean, there is the idea of maybe like going e3 somewhere, like, I don't know, maybe king e4 here, like if knight f4, maybe king f3, go for that. And if king c4 after king f3, then maybe a3, king b3. I mean king e4, knight f4, there is king e3, that's a legal move. King a4, and yeah, d3, king b3. If king e4, knight f4, white's not in Zuzon, so not like h6 because king a4. If king f3 after knight f4, then king c4. If king g3, knight e2, king h4, knight d4, king g4, king b4, f3, no, f4, king a4, f3, knight c2, f2, knight e3, king f3, and that should win for black. King e4, knight f4, king f3, king a4, king g3, knight e2, king h4, knight d4, king g. I mean, if after knight d4, f4, king b3, king g4, king c2, or king g3, king c2, f3, king d2, and I feel like that may not be what I would want necessarily, or I don't know. So king e4, knight f4, if king f3, then king a4, because if king g3, knight e2, it's probably not what I would really want to do. So king e4, knight f4, d3, then I'm saying king c3, d3, king c3. What about a3 here? Then king a3, d3, because then at least maybe I get the king to d4. But still like king b2, king e3, knight f4. king e4, knight f4, king e3, king a4, d3. D3, king c3 to try to go against king d4. Then if a3, knight f4, if king e4, knight f4, king f3, maybe that's how I want to do it. Knight d3, king g3. So d3, king c3, king e4, and then knight f4, king f3. And that may be the way. And then basically be able to take the g3 pawn, still have the passed a pawn, then be running the passed f pawn. Okay, so d3, king c3, king e4, knight f4, king f3, knight d3, king g3, h5, f4, if f4, king b4, f3, king a4, f2, knight f2, king f2, king b3, king g3, king c2, king g4, king d1, and the king's getting back in time. So if d3, king c3, king e4, knight f4, king f3, knight d3, king g3, h5, h6, king b4, if f4, king a4, f3, king b4, f2, knight f2, king f2, king c3, king g3, king d2. The king's also getting back in time. So I don't know if and you're saying if king e4, knight f4, d3, king c3, so that would be like a transposition, so theoretically that wouldn't, there wouldn't be multiple solutions here. So if f4 is start, then knight f4, king f5, it really shouldn't work. It's like king a4 and king g4 or even king b4. King g3, knight e2 being an idea for white to defend. If d3, king c3, if d2 there, then king d2. a3, knight f4, a2, knight d3, king e4, knight c5, king f3, king b2, king g3, h5, f4, king a2, f3, knight d3, f2, knight f2, king f2, king b3, king g3, king c2, king g4, king d1, king h5, king e1. The king's getting to f1. King d5 here, the knight of 4. And d3, king c3. King e4, knight of 4 anyway. And king e4 is being met by knight of 4 with d3 included or not. And if d3, king c3, then if a3, then knight of 4. Knight d3 is coming. If d2 there, then king d2, and then a2. So maybe that's what key is. So d3, king c3, a3, knight f4, d2. And if knight d3, king e4, knight f2, king e3, knight d1, king e2, king c2, a2. I may have discussed that line previously. But that does seem to be the way to go. d3, king c3, a3, knight f4, d2, and king d2, a2, knight d3, king d6. And at least like some similar line, what I was saying I may have discussed previously, like d3, knight f4, d2, knight d3, king d4, knight f2, knight b2 there maybe, but king e3, king like if knight b2 then king e3, king a4, king e2, king b5, d1, queen knight d1, king c5, king e2, king d5, king f3, king e5. It still wouldn't win if d3, knight f4, d2, knight d3, king d4, knight b2, king e3. Yeah, so maybe instead of king d4 after knight d3, maybe king e4, knight b2, king f3, king a4, king g3, king b3, f4, king c2, f3, knight d1, king h4, king d2, king g3. No, then king e1, knight f2. So if d3, knight f4, if king e4, then king c3. If king d4, then maybe black wins like king a4, d2, knight e2, king c4, king d3, or king c4 rather, king c4 after knight e2. Yeah, so d3, knight f4, king d4, knight e6, king e3. Yeah, I mean knight f4, d2, knight d5, king f3, knight c3, king g3, king a4, f4, king b3, f3, king c2, though f2, knight e4. If d3, knight f4, king d4, knight e6, king e3, knight f4, d2, knight d5, king f3, knight c3. Wait, maybe after knight e6, king e3, knight f4, d2, knight d5, king d3, knight c3, king c2. And that should win. Like d3, knight f4, d2, knight d3, king d4. No, d3, knight f4, king d4, knight e6, king e3, knight f4, d2, knight d5, king d3, knight c3, king c2. And then like e3. And they're saying here a3. And then after knight f4, then d2. And if d2, knight d3, king e4, knight f2, king e3, I was discussing that. Knight d1, king e2, king c2, a2. And if knight c5 after king e4, then king e3, king c2, king e2. And if, oh wait, but if king e4, king d2, a2, knight c5. So I guess here maybe, what do I do here then? Because the knight's coming back to f2. Maybe, yeah, not king d5 because then king d2, a2, knight b4. Maybe king e4, king d2, a2, knight c5, king f3, knight b3, king g3. Then maybe that's winning for black, I guess, because the knight's stuck defending against a1 queen, and then the f pawn can run. Maybe like king e2, like king e4, king d2, a2, knight c5, king f3, knight b3, king g3, king e2, f4, king f1, king h4. Like if not king f1, then king g2 is coming. And after king f1, king h4, king g2, king g4, knight c2, h5. I mean, that may win for black. I mean, I don't think I should move the king back to the 6th rank. Then knight f2, king d5, king b3, king d4, king a3, king e3, knight d1. And maybe that could work like king d6, knight f2, a2, king b2, king d5, king e2, king d4, king b2, king e3, knight d1, now king e2, king c2, king d6, knight f2, king d5, king d6, knight f2, king d5, king b3, king d4, king b3, king d4, king e3, king e3, knight d1, king e2, knight c3, king e1, king b3, d1, queen, knight d1, king c3, king e2, king d4, king f3, king e5. So I guess that would work for white. King d6, knight f2, king d5, king b3, king d4, king a3, king e3, knight d1, king e2. I mean, there's king f3, but then king b2, king g3, king c2. And if king e2 after knight d1, then knight c3, king e1, king b3, d1, queen, knight d1, king c3, king e2, king d4, king f3, king e5, and wait some time. So if king e4 here, which is what I was saying earlier, then if knight, no, then the point being king d2 after king e4, a2, knight c5, king f3, knight b3, king g3, king e2, f4, king f1, king h4. Maybe I should accept that as being winning for black. King g2, king g4, knight c2, h5, knight a1, h4, knight c2, h3, king f2, f3, and I guess black should win that. So we want the knight to be stuck guarding against a1 queen. So like not king f3, king c3, when the king gets back into the square of the a pawn. Okay. Alright, so I think that'll be it for solving the puzzles on the stream. Yeah, so I guess like this, then king f3, knight b3, king g3, king e2. I was saying f4, king f1, king h4. Is this winning? Yeah, that's winning. Okay. Yeah. And I was also discussing after d3 if knight f4, I was saying king d4. d2 may also win, but so king d4 is the only winning move. And if knight e6, king e3, knight f4, I was saying d2, knight d5, king d3, knight c3, king c2, I was saying. That does win, although I could also just go a3 right away. Okay. Anyway, that was quite a bit of calculation for those puzzles on this stream, at least. At least quite a bit of calculation for stream. But anyway, or at least a lot of like saying moves on stream, like without moving pieces. Anyway, so I guess I'll end the stream now. And so thanks for watching and bye bye.